Welcome to round 7 of the Formula 1 World Championship at Imola, where the action began on Friday under beautifully sunny skies. Short of something dramatic happening in the weather, and the Italians are pretty good at predicting things, and at the moment it looks to be calm at Imola, and short, of course, of anything dramatic happening on track, it's going to be another McLaren-Mercedes 1-2 at Imola. Totally dominant on Friday, no sprint race this weekend, so it was just free practice 1, free practice 2, just like the good old days. McLaren 1-2 in both of those. Oscar Piastri just ahead of Lando Norris, but don't read too much into that. Lando was really quick on his second run on the soft tyre in the second session in sector 2. Dramatically fast through turn 9, the left-hander at the top of the hill after the Tosa hairpin. I spoke about that in the live stream, probably the best corner in Imola in my opinion. Left-hander where not much happens in terms of off-track drama. Let's hope that continues. But it's a quick corner, fifth gear corner, and Lando really good there, but then backed off in sector 3. So don't read too much into those lap times. I'm not saying Oscar Piastri wasn't brilliant today. He was totally in command every time he was on track, whether it was mediums or on the soft. But Lando looking very good, and I wouldn't be surprised if he gets the pole tomorrow based on what he can do through that left-hander, which basically adds up to sector 2 at Imola. So McLaren very quick on the new soft tyre that Pirelli have brought to the track for the first time. All the teams trying the new C6, as they call it, for the first time. Good tyre, very good soft tyre, lots of grip, seems to last for the entire lap, and there seems to be a second lap you can get out of it if you do a nice cool down lap between the two. And a lot of them ran it for quite long runs anyway, so yeah, looking good. I think the race tyres will probably be medium and then hard, but nonetheless, soft tyre looking a big improvement for Pirelli. But probably a one-stop strategy. Getting ahead of myself a little bit. One-stop strategy here. Very long pit lane. 27 seconds lost in a pit stop here. So unlikely, unless you're at the back of the grid and you're trying something a bit clever. So to some extent, the interest is who will be P3 for that third podium position, assuming both McLarens finish the race, which seems as if they will. Very close between Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari, and Alpine just nibbling around as well, plus Williams, Mercedes. So at the moment, the honour is with Pierre Gasly in the Alpine. Amazing after all the stuff that's been going on at Alpine, the resignation of Ollie Oakes and disappearing to Dubai from Miami, and the arrest of his brother, and Jack Doohan being replaced by Franco Colapinto for the next, well, this race and the next 4. Lots going on, but the Alpine surprisingly good around Imola. Gasly and Colapinto starting on the medium tyre when everybody else is on the soft, and going very well on the medium, like on the 10th or 11th lap. He was right up there with the best of the soft tyre runners, including McLaren in FP1. And FP2, when he put the soft tyres on, Pierre Gasly third quickest. A few things to report from the track today. One was very impressed with George Russell today in FP1 when he was getting messages back to the pits about how low the sister car of Kimi Antonelli was running and reporting on what the plank was doing and so forth. Very nice to see that. But that's a function, of course, of having a really well-balanced team, by which I mean that George Russell, the experienced super quick, number 1, if you like, Kimi Antonelli, the young pretender. No one would ever imagine that he would be up there, equal status with George. And because of that, it's a well-balanced team. Because of that, George has no compunction at all. But you can't imagine Lewis saying that about Charles' car, or indeed Oscar Piastri probably saying about Lando Norris's car now. So it's just a little cameo right now of how well-balanced the driver lineup is at Mercedes. Lots of respect, of course, for Antonelli, who didn't actually go very well on the soft tyre today. He was pretty good sectors 1 and 2, and then had a bit of a moment sector 3. That's why he doesn't appear too high in the results from practice today, but he was quick in sectors 1 and 2, so he'll be right there tomorrow, assuming he can stitch the lap together. Gabriel Bortoleto had a shunt in FP1, went off at Ravazza head-on into the Tech Pro barrier. No real drama there. Another one for Isaac Hadjar in FP2. This was a bigger one when he went off at Tamburello, basically where poor Ayrton had his accident in '94. Very different now, of course. There's a chicane there, and the Tech Pro barrier did their job as well as he spun round to the outside. That brought FP2 to a premature halt, but by then most of the running had been done, so it wasn't a big interruption at all. So let's have a look at the Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari battle on fuel on the long runs today. If you look at what Oscar Piastri is doing, 21.0, 20.9, and then Charles Leclerc's doing a 19.9, you've got to assume that Charles wasn't running full load of fuel there. Even so, not a bad run by him. Not as many laps as the others, but no dig on the tyre at all. and not too bad, 20.0, 20.3. But again, we don't know how much fuel he was running. Well, we just assume he was running lighter because obviously Oscar Piastri is the baseline there. So Oscar's quickest lap was a 20.3. George Russell did a 20.3, 20.3, 22.2, 23.3, 20.2. Max has run pretty representative of where they are relative to McLaren, I think, just a shade slower. And it showed on track. He came out, when they started their long runs, he came out ahead of Oscar and Lando. They're about a corner apart. And after about 4 laps, already Oscar was passed. And then Lando got him as well. Would have been interesting moments for the McLaren drivers, passing the Red Bull like that. And equally, I'm sure for Max, it was quite a good thing in a way, just to show everybody on the pit wall where Red Bull are relative to McLaren. McLaren just in another class. He couldn't get anywhere near them. So looking at those, it's going to be pretty close, I think, between George Russell and Max Verstappen, Mercedes versus Red Bull. Let's have a look at the speed trap now. Again, I've based this on, I've broken this down to the performance of the cars so we can get more of a feel for where the various chassis are. This is the speed trap just before Ravazza, which is the left-hander at the bottom of the hill. So it's quite a longish straight. It's not actually that straight, but it's flat out and it's downhill. Maybe that's one of the reasons the McLaren Mercedes is suddenly quite quick in a straight line. Oh, it's downhill now. But going into, it's 120 meters before Ravazza, that left-hander. It's a double apex left-hander. So Williams Mercedes again quickest, back to where they used to be most of last year, 300. Alpine really quick. That's a bit of a worry in terms of everyone that needs to beat Alpine tomorrow, the group we've just been talking about. Red Bull kind of up there as well. Ferrari not slow. So let's have a look. McLaren, this is very bad news for everybody else. Is McLaren actually not that slow in a straight line at Imola, 296. So yeah, they can live with that. They'll be up front anyway, and if they're not, they'll have the DRS to help them, and then they've got the lap in which to pull away from the opposition. So yeah, that is quite bad news for everybody else, I think, how relatively quick McLaren Mercedes are, because we're used to seeing them near the bottom of the speed trap at the other circuits we've been to this year. Mercedes, on the other hand, quite slow in a straight line, presumably running a little bit more downforce to get the car to work around here, and looking for tyre management on that. Racing Bulls 295, and slowest of all in a straight line, again, Aston Martin, looking quite difficult in terms of their weekend ahead. Going back to turn 9, which is the left-hander at the top of the hill, one of my favorite corners, actually. It's a lovely corner. They're not very good TV angles as they go in there. The cameras, it follows the car head on, and they're flat out in 7th gear, or accelerating up to 7th gear. And then a camera view they show is from the rear, and you see them sort of doing that. So you have no feel. Well, I can't get much feel for what they're actually doing in terms of positioning the car. But in terms of what they're doing with the throttle and the brakes and looking at the telemetry, Lando Norris through there, I've got to say, absolutely superb. He comes out of the throttle. This is lap after lap when he's got fuel in the car on the long run. He's coming out of the throttle long before he even touches the brakes. I was having a discussion with yet another race engineer about this the other day, and they say, oh no, it's absolutely impossible. No way a racing driver would ever do that. Well, he is doing it, and you can see it on the telemetry. He's coming out of the throttle in 7th. He's letting the car settle, and then he's braking 6th. And then he's letting the car, once he's in 5th, he lets the car settle again. He's probably going a little bit too quickly, letting the car scrub off its own speed, and then just finding the perfect moment. His throttle application is beautifully linear as well, coming out of turn 9. So of all the drivers there today, I think Lando was asking least of the car going in to 9, and indeed in the middle and coming out of 9. Really, really good to watch. It was interesting to see Max and George Russell through that corner as well, turn 9, because I suppose, I don't know, it would be 2 corners out of 5. They would go in flat out in 7th. And the first thing both of them would do is hit the brakes. Well, they're still flat out. Left foot braking in the rally sense of the word, just to get the weight transfer such that they've got a front end that they can use going in. But in order to get the front to work, they've got to do a little bit of left foot braking. Obviously, they all brake with a left foot, but in this case, they're braking against throttle. That's what I mean, sort of Michael Schumacher style. And they're doing that to get that weight transfer for the front to work. McLaren drivers never, ever need to do that. Oscar Piastri is slightly different. There are no moments when Oscar, in terms of going into the corner, there are no moments when he's not on either full throttle or heavy braking. No overlap, absolutely beautiful coordination, but unlike Lando, he's not coming out of the throttle and then braking. And that's what he was doing so well in Saudi Arabia, interestingly enough. But through turn 9, I would give 10 out of 10 to Lando Norris on that corner. That's the only one I really studied today. And that's, to me, that's a really important corner because A, it's very quick, and B, there is a bit of a straight afterwards. Yeah, they go down to Acqua Minerale, and it's not that long, but it's a corner where you can lose quite a lot of time, particularly if you go in with understeer, and then it's a really bad corner. And Charles Leclerc, absolutely perfect as well in terms of his throttle. He was never overlapping, but there was never a moment when he could just let the car breathe. Everything was always brake or throttle, and the throttle application a little bit more circumspect. There were certain laps when he was giving it too much throttle and having to come out, something that the McLaren drivers never ever have to do because they've got so much feel for the surface of the road through the grip level they've got in that car. Lewis Hamilton, by contrast, braking against throttle, but not in a Max George Russell way, where you can see it's for weight transfer. It's just in a slightly messy way. And I did a short yesterday about Lewis unfollowing all his stuff on Instagram, and I thought, well, that's a step in the right direction. I wonder if we're going to see a change now in the way he's driving the car. And it was the same Lewis. It was the same Lewis we've seen all year on Friday at Imola. Maybe it's going to change tomorrow, but it was quite wide turning, very late braking, which is why I think he's in a straight line, which is why I think he's complaining so much about the brakes. Maybe there was something very specific about the car, but if you're going to brake like that late, that deep, you are always very prone to the brakes being imperfect. And that's not something he ever had at McLaren or at Mercedes, particularly at McLaren when he was on the Carbon Industries. And Fernando Alonso arrived with all that road dust, having used the Hitco brakes, which has the softer pedal feel. And Lewis was always able to massage the brakes more than Fernando. But that's kind of gone away now. It's another symptom of what we're seeing with Lewis. And quite a frustrating day for him, obviously, in front of the fans and so forth. But anyway, still got the weekend to come. And the Ferrari, ultimately in qualifying form, should be a quick car around here. It's quickish in a straight line. And on those new Pirelli C6s, assuming you can get a free lap and all 3 sessions, that car should be able to produce a pretty good lap time, I would have thought. Quite a lot of bouncing, quite a lot of bottoming today with the cars. But in general, a very, very close battle behind the McLarens between 4 or 5 teams, and there'll be some close racing behind them as well. Oliver Berman again looked very good in the Haas Ferrari, but I think again I felt a bit sorry for Jack Doohan, very sorry for Jack Doohan, that on a day when the Alpine, or a weekend when the Alpine looks to be quite quick, he's not driving the car. I think he would have been quite quick in that car today. Anyway, we'll see how Colapinto goes over the weekend. So big thanks to REC watchers, to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, and to TrackNinja for their support of this channel. Thanks for watching. We'll be back again with qualifying from Imola tomorrow. Don't know what it is about Imola, charming city in a charming part of the world, but again, there was tension at this amazing circuit. 2 big accidents in qualifying. Drivers walked away from both of them, but both of them in the area where we lost Ayrton and Roland Ratzenberger in '94. Definitely clammy palms in the pit lane as the red flags came out again and everybody stood around and waited. And there were some long waits too, particularly one when we were waiting to see whether or not Oliver Berman would get into Q2, because he appeared to have done on his last lap. But because he crossed the line just before the checkered flag, as the track had gone red, that time was disallowed. But there was a long delay while that was analysed, not really becoming of Formula One. Qualifying supposed to be bang, 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 bang. Well, not against the walls anyway. Bottom line, Oscar Piastri. This is probably the best pole he's ever taken, because to do it, he had to beat an absolutely superb Max Verstappen. And Oscar did that with an equally superb lap in the absolutely superb McLaren MCL 39, maximizing its grip and balance and getting the pole in the last phase of Q3. It was a really, really impressive performance from Oscar. The more so because Lando Norris, his teammate, who I predicted yesterday could well be on the pole because of how well he was driving, particularly through turn 9 in sector 2, just faded away under the pressure. Lots of little micro mistakes on the laps on both sets of tyres in Q3. And for all we can say about Lando's technique and his skill when he's doing it right, when he's not under pressure, when he's under pressure, certainly the fragility is showing through. The pressure partly from Max Verstappen in the Red Bull, but mainly, as I predicted last winter, from his teammate Oscar Piastri. He's the guy always that Lando's had to beat, and at the moment he's not doing it. He's getting nowhere near it. Indeed, Lando didn't even qualify P3 behind Oscar and Max. He qualified P4 because in the closing seconds of Q3, that position was taken by Mercedes' George Russell, and had a pretty difficult qualifying, but really got it together with a classic George Russell lap. Everything on the absolute edge, very like Oscar Piastri's lap. Very like it, interchangeable almost in terms of the way they drove the lap. Max Verstappen, very different, compensating for all the things that weren't right on the Red Bull. continuing to do his left foot braking into 9. But for George to out-qualify McLaren's Lando Norris means that Lando really has to go away and think deeply about how he's handling that situation with Oscar Piastri, because quite clearly, whatever he's doing now is not working. He's in the second or the best car in Formula One, and only to qualify 4th around Imola is not good at all. But there was another moment to qualifying as well, and we'll get onto the 2 shunts in a minute. But there was another moment which is pivotal, really, I think, and that was both Ferraris failing to get through into Q3. And who was quickest in Q2? Carlos Sainz, the hero Ferrari driver that was sacked at the end of the year, replaced by Lewis Hamilton. I mean, if ever there was a classic graphic demonstration of how Ferrari have got it wrong ever since they decided to do that, then this was it. Q2 at Imola, at Ferrari's home circuit. Autodromo Dino e Enzo Ferrari. Packed with Ferrari fans. Ferrari did not make it out of Q2, and the driver they sacked, probably now a national hero, driving for Williams-Mercedes, Carlos Sainz, quickest in Q2. If anything sums up everything that's wrong about Ferrari ever since they took that decision, then it was this moment. And it was this moment in Q2. And Freddie Vasseur's management of the team should now really be under the spotlight, because it's one thing for the top brass to say we want a brand like Lewis Hamilton in the car. It's quite another for the team principal to allow that to happen. And it's not only that, of course, Ferrari were reasonably good yesterday, somewhere near Mercedes, but they fell away today with Max Verstappen finding over a second in lap time compared with yesterday. Ferrari drivers only found a 10th, 2/10ths maximum. It was pathetic. And that speaks to the way the cars are being run and the decisions that are being taken trackside. Aston Martin, by contrast, like Red Bull, found almost a second overnight. This perhaps is the first time we've seen the Adrian Newey effect at Aston Martin. They were nowhere yesterday, but today, not so bad on the straight and pretty good over the lap as a whole as well. And they've got to say the car was good, because Lance Stroll was right up there with Fernando Alonso as well. Very good job by Aston. Very good job too by Red Bull to have found all that time in the car. And it showed up in FP3 this morning at Imola when Max was quickest on medium tyres. Quicker, just quicker than the 2 McLaren drivers on medium tyres, and not far away as well on the soft tyre too. So a lot of really good overnight work from Red Bull. Not the first time we've seen that this year. So in answer to the questions of can Red Bull survive without Adrian Newey, one of the things would have been, well, can they get this car developed at track if they do have a poor Friday? We've seen it very efficiently at Red Bull this year. So very, very impressive performance from them in the post-Adrian era. Meanwhile, Aston Martin, now in the Adrian era, benefiting, I would suggest, probably from some input from Adrian to get that car as good as it was today. To the shunts, Yuki Tsunoda, big one, second chicane before the one before Toza, lost it coming out. I say lost it, got a wheel on the grass, spun round into the barrier, and it flipped him over when he hit the barrier this time. It looked spectacular. Yuki was able to walk away, but that was right at the beginning of Q1, so that held things up with a red, obviously, while those repairs were made. And then at the end of Q2, with all those on the bubble under massive pressure, a big accident for Franco Colapinto, the driver that has replaced Jack Doohan at Alpine, presumably because they felt Jack wasn't doing the job, so they put in Colapinto, who, as I pointed this out in the live stream, spun twice in the wet in Brazil last year. And I did say rather cynically in the same live stream that I hope that by the time Colapinto gets back into a Formula One car, he will have done a lot of work on his driving to have got rid of those really wide entries and that rather aggressive approach that he has to the initial turn-in. Well, it didn't appear to be that way yesterday. Didn't want to make too many snap judgments. But here, coming out of the first chicane, again, not very far from the point where Ayrton would have lost it in 1994. The back end, like Yuki Tsunoda, got it on the grass, spun him round, then he was just a passenger locked up, and another big shunt for him. Again, a function of just getting on the power. When you're a driver like Colapinto and you do turn in so late and you're waiting to get on the power as soon as possible, because that is where your speed has got to come from. You're not doing any sort of pace into the rotation point. You're doing it all on exit and power application. You're going to make that sort of error under pressure, as he did in Brazil twice, and now as he's done in Imola. And again, if you put this in the context of the Jack Doohan shunt in Japan, which was basically caused by Alpine putting a renter driver in the car for the first session, Jack getting no track time at all in FP1, and then having to go out, very, very dodgy DRS situation going into turn 1 at Suzuka, having that big shunt, and now this big crash for Colapinto as well. The amount of damage that Alpine have done in terms of eating into the budget cap, repairs, if nothing else, just appalling management to have allowed any of that to happen. Meanwhile, Pierre Gasly sailed serenely into Q3. I say serenely, it wasn't at all. Serenely in terms of the way he was driving the car, absolutely beautiful performance from Pierre Gasly. But for a while, it was touch and go as to whether he would get into Q3, because on his first Q2 lap, he was badly balked at the top chicane by Fernando Alonso in the Aston. It was along the lines of, who's that in the Aston Martin? Give me his name. I'll always remember it. Yeah, it was Fernando Alonso. He lost that lap, but he did then make up for it on his second lap. A really good lap for Pierre to get into Q3 in the Alpine. So to recap, it's Oscar Piastri on the pole, Max Verstappen alongside him. Interesting drag race, that interesting braking area into that first chicane. George Russell, P3, looking for a place alongside Max as they're going into the braking area on the cleaner side of the road, obviously. Lando Norris probably in a good position to be grandstanding and watching tomorrow, P4. Fernando Alonso, P5. Wow, best qualifying position we've seen from Fernando for a long time. Congratulations to him. Well earned. Carlos Sainz, eventually P6. They kind of ran out of red soft tyres in the end, but what a performance from Carlos Sainz today. Alex Albon had a massive moment in Q2 at the top chicane behind him in P7. Lance Stroll, 8. Not bad at all for the son of the boss. Ninth, Isaac Hadjar just continues to qualify top 10. We almost take it for granted now. Another really good performance from Isaac Hadjar. And P10, the aforementioned Pierre Gasly in the Alpine. And now the list of those who did not get into Q3, the two Ferrari drivers, Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton, a tenth of a second apart. Charles just quicker. Kimi Antonelli, P13 in the Mercedes. I said yesterday, don't be too worried that he wasn't going that well because he was on a good lap. Then he didn't get it right in sector 3, but no doubt he'll stitch the lap together today. Well, he did stitch it together, but it was pretty dodgy stitching. And I come back to the point I made before. Through the medium and fast corners, he's trying to look like George Russell, driving them as George drives them, but he isn't George Russell. George is absolutely perfect, but on the limit. You don't want to make one mistake if you're George Russell, but he did the lap and he got away with it. Kimi Antonelli is trying to do that, but he's having to back away. Every time the car's moving, you can see him backing away from it. Superb again through the tight corners, very good on change of direction, but it's the fast corners that were hurting him around Imola today. So there's a bit of a pattern there. Yesterday, P18, yeah, I mean, it wasn't a good lap, but then P13 only today. So there is that trend developing for Kimi on this circuit. Liam Lawson, who almost unnoticed, qualified P16 in the other bulls. I mean, he's really getting overshadowed by Isaac Hadjar, Nico Hulkenberg, Esteban Ocon, and Oliver Berman. Felt sorry for Oliver because he doesn't deserve to be starting P19. He's definitely quicker than that. And then, of course, Yuki Tsunoda had that shunt. Good to see both drivers walking away from those accidents. So, yeah, stand back for that first run down to the first chicane. About time Max Verstappen made a decent start. He's had a few dodgy ones in the last couple of races. Oscar, no doubt, all fired up. I mean, Oscar Piastri just thriving on the results he's got and the pressure that he's been able to apply without even thinking about it, really, just doing his job on Lando Norris. And it's by the race, it's showing more and more how Lando is suffering under the pressure from Oscar. And all Oscar is doing, just having to do the same thing every race, just drive the race car, stay calm, get on with it. Work with Tom Stallard and the boys, and wow, what a result for him. Okay, qualifying now over at Imola. Let's hope it's an incident-free race tomorrow. We've had enough of that. Let's hope that it's good racing, and we'll see you then. Take care. I began the Friday video by saying that extreme weather or extreme track variables aside, this should be a walkover weekend for McLaren-Mercedes, an easy 1-2. The car was that good on Friday. And I still stand by that. I think the car was still that good on Sunday, except that they didn't win. And that just underlines the quality of the drive we saw today from Max Verstappen in the Red Bull Honda. I thought it was interesting on the slowdown lap, Lando Norris, delighted, of course, to be P2, to change a little bit the dynamic at McLaren, with Oscar on this occasion finishing third in the other McLaren, thanking the team for the performance. But then saying we just didn't have the pace today. Well, I don't buy that. They definitely had the car to win this Grand Prix, but it all went away with Lando's qualifying performance, and then it went away for Oscar Piastri at the first corner. Oscar, as kind of predicted, on the clean side of the road, made a very, very good start, as did George Russell behind him, also on the clean side of the road in P3, and Max Verstappen bogged down on the dirty side of the grid. And as they pulled away, Oscar appeared to have the lead, and George Russell got up to second place. If you look at the telemetry, the timing and the telemetry, he's in second place long before they get to that first chicane. Problem is, he's on the inside behind Oscar Piastri. I say the problem, that's normally where you would expect the pace to be. Oscar's leading the race. Max is being squeezed out on the outside, and there's George right behind him. But the problem is, as I say, that Oscar Piastri, having got the lead and made a good start, then I think just thought, well, this is easy now. I'll just brake a little bit earlier going into turn one, make sure there are no incidents. And as he's doing this, George Russell behind him is having to feather the throttle in order not to run into the back of Oscar. And when Oscar comes out of the throttle, he does so before he actually hits the brake pedal. And at this moment, on the outside, Max Verstappen is going 30 kilometers an hour quicker than Oscar Piastri going into turn one. And guess what? He's kind of on the racing line now, and he just goes straight in and chooses a bit of road between Oscar and what is going to be a diminishing gap going into the apex curve, chooses that gap and goes through. There were probably a couple of millimeters either side. Absolutely perfect. Oscar does nothing to stop it, partly because he wasn't even expecting it. And I think he was completely surprised that Max was there. And then behind him, of course, George Russell is irate, thinking, what is Oscar doing braking so early going into turn one? It was just the most brilliant, opportune pass you'll ever see in Formula One. Superb work by Max Verstappen. And at that point, of course, the whole texture of the race immediately changed, because on these soft Pirellis, the C6 that they ran in qualifying is the softest Pirelli tyre ever seen since they've been in Formula One. And on the medium tyre on which the front runners were starting, it was going to be a very difficult race for anybody who wasn't in front on free air and in a position, therefore, to keep the tyres relatively cool. And Oscar Piastri, in the space of just a second or so, suddenly went from being the pole winner and the leader of the race in a position to look after the tyres and control the pace of the race in what was patently the best car, to a driver now that was behind Max Verstappen and having to look after the temperatures of the tyres on the McLaren. But still, he had a real opportunity. There are 2 DRS zones at Imola. But guess what? The straights at Imola are not really long enough between the chicanes and the corners for DRS really to make a difference. That's what makes Imola such a great race circuit, in my opinion. And Oscar, although he was definitely quicker than Max, and he did start to close a gap that Max had opened out over the first couple of laps, as he's so good at doing, then started to run into trouble with his tyres and got onto the radio saying, I don't think a one-stop strategy is going to work. And McLaren then went into 2-stop strategy mode, I guess thinking then at that point, yeah, we still got the best car. Oscar Piastri is driving never better. For sure, Max Verstappen will come in as well. It looks as if we're doing the undercut. He came in as early as lap 13 to switch to a new set of hard tyres now from the mediums on which he started the race. And he had another new set of hards in the garage, so no problem there. But the real issue was that he was released at that point into a massive amount of traffic. And on that new set of hards, he was unable to make any sort of ground on Max. So forget any thought of an undercut. This was a 2-stop strategy in what very quickly became, obviously to everyone on the pit lane, a one-stop strategy race that Max Verstappen was running on free air. And I think at this point, McLaren suddenly thought, what have we done here? This should have been our race. We've got the better car. Max has got the lead. We should still be able to win it. But the way to win it was not to go to that 2-stop strategy and to put him out in the traffic. The way to win it was just to sit there behind Max and hope that something would happen as the race went longer. But they didn't do that. I think they over-strategized this one at McLaren. I think that was the problem for Oscar Piastri's race today. It was just over-strategized and not enough looking at what was actually going on, because these two were just walking away from the rest of the field. George Russell took a lot of time out of Lando Norris in the early phase of the race, made it difficult for Lando to get him. Eventually, Lando, just showing how good the McLaren was, passed George on the outside going into the first chicane. So that was easy for him. But when Oscar came in, it was then Max Verstappen with something like 10 seconds over Lando Norris. A perfect position for Max. And whenever Lando went quickly, Max just matched him because his tyres were just in great shape. He'd been looking after them so well in that free air. So the only thing then, as Lando said on the radio quite clearly, the way for me to do this race is to be in free air and to go for as long a stint as possible. And he did that, in the hope, of course, that there would be some sort of safety car or virtual safety car intervention. And there was a virtual safety car on this occasion. Esteban Ocon ground to a halt in the Haas Ferrari on the rise up out of Tosa on the left. And they put out the virtual safety car, which is good to see. Much fairer, I think, than the safety car, which is a bit crass in Formula One. It's often deployed just to bring the race closer together again. But there's a VSC on this occasion. That was a good one. And the problem was that came out just 2 laps after Lando Norris had stopped for his new set of hard tyres. So he was now in trouble in terms of the race to Max Verstappen. From Max's point of view, what would have been a 27 pit stop about at Imola, a very long pit lane here, the longest on the Formula One calendar, was reduced to about a 17-second pit stop. So by the time the virtual safety car came in, and with Oscar Piastri also stopping within the VSC and going to his second set of hard tyres, by the time it came in, Max Verstappen had a race-winning margin over Lando Norris, partly because of the way he'd ground Oscar Piastri into taking that early stop, partly because of the virtual safety car, and partly because of how consistently well he'd driven the Red Bull. No errors anywhere, just maximizing it within the envelope of what he wanted to do with the tyre management on every lap. Just brilliant to watch. So now Max had something like an 18-second lead, 18.7, 18.5 lead over Lando Norris. And they're both on new hard tyres. So here again, you would have thought the McLaren would start to eke away at that lead. But it didn't happen. Max matched everything that Lando did at this phase of the race. And again, I have to underline, I think the McLaren was the better car, but not by a margin that was going to allow Lando to close the gap. A 20-second, 18-second margin was too much. That's much too much of a difference between the two. So then it looked as if Max Verstappen, by dint of that first corner pass, and then obviously the break that came with the VSC, was going to win at Imola with a massive margin. Except that another car stopped coming out of Tosa. On this occasion, it was Kimi Antonelli, who had had an early battle with Lewis Hamilton, holding off Lewis Hamilton for quite a lot of laps. I wonder what Lewis thought about that. He started on the hard tyre, Charles Leclerc on the medium, like everybody else, but Lewis is on the hard. And Antonelli was also on the hard. So it was a straight race in the early laps. And Antonelli was in front of Lewis, and there's no way Lewis was going to get past him. It was, I don't know what that was. That was in the context, I guess, of Carlos Sainz being quickest in Q2 yesterday when the Ferraris failed to make it into Q3. I guess this was another thing of Lewis staring at the back of the car he used to drive in front of the Italian Ferrari crowd. Anyway, we'll get on to Lewis because there's a nice ending to the Lewis Hamilton day at Imola. Anyway, on this occasion, they didn't deploy the VSC, even though it appeared as if Antonelli's car stopped in about the same place as Esteban Ocon's Haas. I think the FIA will probably say, oh no, on this occasion it was more difficult to get rid of the Mercedes because it wasn't as near the entry point for the guardrail and things like that. I'm sure there'll be some sort of bona fide excuse for it. But I think to the casual observer, two cars stopping in about the same place, one resulting in a virtual safety car, one resulting in a safety car, bunching together the race when the leader is out there by 20 seconds, definitely looks a bit suspicious. Anyway, everybody came in for tyres except Charles Leclerc, who gained track position, which he'd lost with the virtual safety car thing, and the Aston Martins, who had also lost time. Fernando Alonso complaining about, I think he said something like, I'm the unluckiest driver in Formula One ever, or something like that. I would dispute that. I mean, obviously, he hasn't had the greatest of luck throughout his career, Fernando, but it was a little bit of an outburst unnecessary. Anyway, because of that, they didn't bring either Fernando or Lance Stroll in for the second safety car. They left them out there to gain track position that they'd lost in the VSC. But everybody else came in, except, of course, Oscar Piastri, who'd gone onto this two-stop strategy. His tyres were 11 laps old, and he didn't have any more in the garage. There's nothing else he could do. He had to stay out in that second set of used hard. So it was Max Verstappen now, with Oscar Piastri behind, having got that track position in the safety car, with Lando Norris behind him now, like Max, on a new set of hard tyres. And as they're going around behind the safety car, Lando Norris got on the radio when they're behind the safety car and said, and started waffling a bit about, well, you know, guys, obviously, you know, I don't want any team orders. I don't want to be but, you know, Oscar is on the older tyres, and if I'm going to have to go out win this race, it'd be good if I have a bit of a clear track. All this sort of thing going on. And I have to say, Cameron, when I do the live chats with Cameron before Imola, said to me, you know, what do you think the dynamic at McLaren is now? And I said, well, I think if there's a situation where he hasn't got much to lose and he can score a lot of points within the team, he's got such a comfortable points lead now, or relatively comfortable, that Oscar Piastri in that situation will probably let Lando pass. He score a lot of points within the team. They're not going for the win. It was for second place. Maybe he could have beaten Max. And I thought Oscar would probably let him pass. And I said that at that moment live when it was happening in Imola. But he didn't. Oscar stayed in front of Lando for as long as he could. And I suppose what I'd forgotten was that Oscar is actually a very gritty Australian racing driver. And he wasn't that slow anyway on those 11-lap-old hard tyres. Yes, he was slow relative to Max. Max pulled away basically absolutely perfectly, about a second a lap for the first 4 or 5 laps after the safety car came in. It was just a case study on revitalized concentration, on doing the job perfectly. I mean, he was quicker. He was purple in places like Sector 2. And he went on to set fastest race lap, basically, while Oscar Piastri was holding up Lando Norris. But Lando wasn't doing enough to assert his position. He did eventually. After 2 or 3 laps, he got him with DRS going into turn one on the outside. Again, that the McLaren is that good, and started to pull away from Oscar. But the minute that happened, that's when Max set his fastest lap. Just head down, focus on the job, did it perfectly, and won the race. I'm still completely staggered that he did win this Grand Prix against those 2 McLaren-Mercedes on this circuit. It was a win of racecraft. It was a win of superb driving under pressure, consistently superb driving under pressure. And it will be, I don't know how many times we say it now in terms of great poles or great wins. This was one of the best. Certainly that overtake into turn one was as good as you're going to see this side of, I don't know what, Nigel Mansell on PK87 Silverstone. It was that good. It was just that. It was just reflex, like Nigel's was at Silverstone. Just reflex action. Piastri's down the inside. He's going to take it easy. Bam, down the outside, got him. And of course, there's, if you think about it, think about the risk at that point. If you were Max Verstappen driving that car, you'd think, oh, what if Oscar comes across, got the whole field behind me? Maybe there'll be a drama. We've already had some dramas already. There'll be another thing. But none of that. Clear head, straight through, bang, took the lead. It just blew I think everybody except Max's mind was blown by that. Absolutely amazing performance. So Lando Norris finished second. As I say, he'll be delighted with that because he beat Oscar Piastri, kind of. I mean, it was a strategy thing. I think they over-strategized Oscar's race, as I say. Oscar was third, which won't, displease him because he was quick and he didn't get the best of safety cars and everything else. Probably the wrong strategy. And of course, he's still leading the World Championship, so that's a good thing. But fourth place, Lewis Hamilton. I mean, he'd found himself stranded a little bit after the virtual safety car stop when he went to mediums from the hards on which he started the race. It was a logical thing to go to mediums at that point. And he was very quick for a while, passing some of the midfield traffic. By the time he got past there, the tyres had gone off. And Charles, who was on the hard tyre at that point, passed Lewis and started to pull away. But then, of course, the safety car came out. And that changed things because they left Charles out there. But then, of course, on a new set of hards, it was relatively easy for Lewis to get ahead of Charles. And his race for a while was with Alex Albon, who was also on a new set of hards on the Williams. And Alex had been P3 for a while after the virtual safety car period. And Oscar Piastri got him in about 5 laps, of course. He was always going to do that. But Alex Albon drove really well in the Williams Mercedes, as did Carlos Sainz. And Lewis had a big drama with him going into turn one, lots of dramatic stuff there. But eventually it was Lewis that did get the better of Albon and finished in P4 for Ferrari, going very quickly over the last 5 or 6 laps of the race, bringing the Tifosi to their feet on all the hills and surrounding areas, spectator areas around Imola. And when Ferrari fans get going, it's something to see. So that was good. I mean, Lewis was able to wave to the crowd on his slowdown lap and feel as if he'd done a good day's work. The question is, of course, and this is sort of the James Hunt thing, well, why was he only quick at the end of the race when his adrenaline was up and he was doing all that passing on a new set of tyres? Why was it only then? Where was he in qualifying? Where was he in the early laps of the race? And so that's the problem at Ferrari. When the car goes that well, and Lewis Hamilton finishes fourth, you wonder why they didn't get through to Q3. That was the problem. What happened in qualifying was the problem for Ferrari. Yes, you could say, yeah, ray of light now. Good drive by Lewis. And Charles Leclerc, of course, he also had his own drama with Alex Albon, was completely despondent after the race, given the way it had gone for him. And he won't be happy at all. But it's all to do with the whole atmosphere at Ferrari at the moment and where they're going with the car and where it's going with the 2 drivers as well. I'm not sure this result will necessarily clear their minds before going to Monaco next weekend, although Monaco, of course, is such a specialised circuit. It's all about qualifying that maybe anything can happen there. Maybe the Ferrari will be incredibly quick, who knows. But yeah, a confusing result for Ferrari, I would say. A great ending to the weekend for Lewis Hamilton. He can smile and wave to the crowds, as I say, but not one that I think will make a lot of sense when they're waking up at Maranello on Monday morning and trying to analyse exactly what happened. Quick look at some of the other results. Very good drive by Alex Albon, as I say, to P5. Charles Leclerc 6th. George Russell 7th. Got the worst of the virtual safety car with his pit stops. Drove like crazy in a car that was very, very difficult to drive. And again, you wonder how he managed to qualify 3rd in that car, whereas Ferrari didn't even get into Q3. When you see the way the race worked today, you see my point. Carlos Sainz 8th, so points for both Williams, Mercedes, very good. Isaac Hadjar yet again into the points in the Racing Bulls, and Yuki Tsunoda, who had his share of wheel bashing as well, particularly with Carlos Sainz, got away with it too. Amazingly, actually, I thought he'd get a penalty for nerfing Carlos going into the first chicane. The final point scorer in the other Red Bull, P11, Fernando Alonso, be very, very annoyed with that, I would have thought. Nico Hülkenberg, journeyman Formula One driver, if ever there was one, P12, and 13th for Pierre Gasly. Very disappointing day for Alpine with Colapinto down in 16th place and having had that enormous shunt as well. So what a day. Roll on Monaco. As I say, it'll be a completely different thing there. It'll just be about qualifying, who can get to the front of the grid there. Should be, in theory, should be McLaren, but if anything, it'd be more open at Monaco than it was at Imola. So expect a surprise. It could be a George Russell. It could, of course, be a Max Verstappen. But in terms of the best package, still the odds favour McLaren-Mercedes. Quick word before we close, just to remind you that if you go to the description below this video, you'll see the reference to RAC watches and the discount you can have if you order a watch from REC. And of course, the watch we're featuring is the Senna Lotus 98T chassis number 4 Renault Turbo watch. And it's called that because it actually uses some of the aluminium from the original parts of that car in the tachymeter of the watch. Massively detailed, very, very painstaking design and construction, Swiss made as well. A beautiful, beautiful timepiece, remembering Ayrton, the last of the black and gold Lotuses as well. So, as I say, you can order that with a discount by mentioning the word Peter. All the details in the description below this video. So thanks for watching. A big thanks to Jetcraft, to REC Watches, to TrackNinja, and of course to OEM Exclusive for their support of this channel. That's the first part of this triple header over. Monaco next weekend.